I moved into this neighborhood thinking it would be a peaceful escape from the chaos of the city. A spacious yard, a quiet street, and what the realtor described as a supportive homeowners association. Supportive was definitely not the right word. It all started on a warm Saturday morning. I was outside planting some new flowers along the fence. The sun was shining, and for a moment, life actually felt calm. I pushed my shovel into the soil, expecting a nice clean dig, but instead I hit something solid. At first I thought it was a rock, so I dug a little more, then more. What I uncovered turned out to be a large PVC pipe. Definitely not something that should have been under the flower bed. Confused, I followed the pipe downward, making a small trench to reveal its path. It didn't connect to anything on my property. It was coming from the direction of the neighborhood and leading further into my yard. And the weirdest part? I had lived here for only 3 months. No one told me anything about pipes. Nothing was noted on any property paperwork. Maybe it was left over from old construction, a mistake. So I called the HOA office to ask. The president, Mark, answered the phone. His tone was already irritated, the kind of man who wakes up annoyed at the world. "What do you mean, pipes?" he snapped. I described exactly what I found, and before I could even finish, he cut me off. "That's HOA infrastructure. Leave it alone." Then click. He hung up on me. I stood there staring at the phone like, did that really just happen? If someone had placed a utility on my land without permission, wasn't I supposed to know? An uneasy feeling crawled through me. I returned outside, this time paying closer attention to the ground around the pipe. There were other subtle dips in the yard, slightly sunken lines that created a faint grid pattern. I hadn't noticed before, but now it was obvious. There were multiple pipes under my property. I crouched down and whispered to myself, what the hell? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I grabbed a flashlight and walked outside around 11 p.m. The air was cool and silent until I heard voices. I peeked through a crack in my fence and saw 2 men in reflective vests crouched near the far end of my yard, working silently, extending the pipe system. In the dark, without permission, I walked toward them. "Hey! What are you doing on my property?" I shouted. They froze, their smiles disappearing instantly. One of them grabbed his radio and mumbled something I couldn't hear. The other just said flatly, "We have orders." "From who?" "HOA." They packed up quickly and rushed away without another word. The next morning, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my door. "Stop interfering with HOA property. Fine, $700. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the sheer stupidity of it. I hadn't touched anything except discovering what they had hidden under my land. I tried talking to my neighbors. Some nervously admitted they'd seen pipes being installed at night before I moved in. One older man leaned in and whispered, "They aren't supposed to do that. They just didn't want to pay the city." So this wasn't an accident. It was a scheme, and I had been the unlucky one who noticed. That afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If they wouldn't show me these so-called plans, I'd get proof myself. I hired a certified land surveyor to map out everything underground. When he finished scanning my yard, he looked at me with wide eyes. "These pipes, they extend through your entire property, illegally," he said. "They used your land to drain wastewater from several homes downstream. They weren't approved by the city. Illegal construction, unauthorized installation, property violation, and the arrogance of trying to cover it up. Now I understood why the HOA president didn't want me digging, why the workers showed up at night, why the violation notice came the next morning. Dark clouds crowded the sky, threatening a downpour. It felt like the weather was matching my mood, heavy and ready to burst. I paced in my living room, waiting for a response from the city inspector I contacted the night before. When my phone rang, I snatched it up instantly. "Mr. Davis? This is Inspector Alvarez from the County Public Works Department. You mentioned unauthorized drainage infrastructure. Yes, I replied, my voice tight with frustration. They installed their sewage pipes under my yard, without permission, and they're still expanding it. He asked for the documentation. I sent the scans and photos, and there was a long pause on the line. They're routing all runoff from that neighborhood into your property, he said, his voice low and serious. That's illegal. I'll be there today. A spark of relief flickered in my chest. Finally, someone who took this seriously. While waiting for him to arrive, I wandered outside to the edge of my property. The grass felt soft and uneven beneath my feet, sinking slightly into the hidden network of pipes. I imagined wastewater flowing beneath me. The thought made my skin crawl. As I looked around, I saw Mark, the HOA president, marching toward me, his face red like he'd been boiling in anger since dawn. There are procedures in this neighborhood, he spat. You don't just call the city. Funny, I said, crossing my arms, because you don't just build a sewer system under someone's home. He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a fake friendly tone that didn't fool me for a second. Let's be reasonable. This community relies on that drainage. Removing it hurts everyone. So you bury it under my land? Without my consent? It was the only practical route. I laughed sharply. No, it was the only free one. His eyes darkened. Drop this. We're trying to help the neighborhood. No, I said coldly. You're trying to save money, and you're willing to break the law to do it. He opened his mouth to argue, but that's when a white SUV pulled up to the curb. Inspector Alvarez stepped out, wearing a neon vest and carrying a clipboard. Mark's expression shifted instantly, from aggressive bully to panicked politician. Good morning, the inspector said. You must be the HOA president? Mark straightened his posture, plastering on a fake smile. Yes, and this is all a misunderstanding. The pipes are not his concern. Actually, Alvarez replied, expression stern, they are exactly his concern. They're buried on his legally registered property. Mark's jaw clenched. We have community approval. Do you have city approval? The inspector asked. Silence. Alvarez didn't wait for an answer. He walked around the yard, examining the exposed pipe and marking the ground with bright orange paint. He asked questions. I answered. Mark stammered excuses. When Alvarez finished his inspection, he flipped his clipboard closed. Those pipes must be removed, immediately. Mark sputtered. That will cost thousands. The HOA can't just... That's not my problem, Alvarez cut him off. You broke code. You'll fix it. And if the system is active... He paused, looking toward the sky. There could be serious consequences if a heavy storm hits. These pipes aren't designed to handle overflow. Almost as if the clouds had been waiting for their cue. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain began quickly, pounding the ground like buckets being dumped from the sky. Alvarez looked at the slurry forming around the trench and muttered, This might get ugly. Mark's face drained of color. He stood there frozen before rushing back to his house, already pulling his phone out to call someone, probably trying to find a way out of the mess he'd created. Alvarez stepped closer to me. Keep your doors and low windows sealed, just in case. If the system backs up, it will push sewage toward the lowest points. Which, he glanced around, appears to be your yard. I nodded, swallowing the uneasy lump forming in my throat. The rain intensified into a torrential waterfall. Water began pooling rapidly. The buried pipes gurgled from the pressure. Something deep underground groaned like metal protesting. Then, a boom. A section of my lawn buckled, muddy water blasting upward like a miniature geyser. I stumbled back. The inspector cursed under his breath. The pipes couldn't handle the storm. They were reaching their limit. But the water wasn't staying on my property. Rivulets of brown, murky drainage spilled past my fence, racing downhill, directly toward the neat and polished row of HOA houses that relied on that illegal pipework. For years, they had been dumping their problems into my land. Now nature was returning the favor. And in that moment, watching the flood pour back into their streets, a fierce satisfaction tightened my chest. Mark and the board wanted to bury their mistakes under my home. Well, those mistakes were about to surface. Literally. The HOA started this fight. I wasn't going to be the one drowning in the consequences. The sun was just rising when the homeowner, still exhausted from the night before, sat staring at the backyard as the first rays of morning hit the muddy ground. The stench had calmed a little overnight, but it hung in the air like an uninvited guest refusing to leave. The sleepless night still echoed with arguments from the angry homeowners across the street, and the HOA board members' homes had suffered the worst of it. Sewage flooded their basements, ruining expensive carpets, furniture, and probably their pride. It was poetic justice, but it wasn't enough, not when the board had knowingly used the homeowner's private property as a shortcut for their own convenience. A soft knock sounded at the front door. When opened, a middle-aged man with a neon vest greeted them. City inspector, badge visible and clipboard in hand. "You filed the complaint about unauthorized piping?" he asked. "Yes," the homeowner replied, stepping aside so he could walk in. "It's in the yard. You'll smell it." He winced, sniffed the air, and sighed. "I already do." They led him through the house and into the backyard. His expression tightened the moment his boots touched the wet soil. "You weren't kidding. This is absolutely a violation." He crouched near the exposed pipe, eyes narrowing. "This isn't a city line. Wrong materials, wrong depth, no permits. Looks like someone tried to take a cheap shortcut." The homeowner crossed their arms. "The HOA, they said it was drainage improvement, but they tricked me, pressured me." "Did they get your signature or written permission?" "They forged one." The words burned coming out. That got the inspector's full attention. He stood up straight. "Forging authorization is a crime. They did this to avoid paying for proper installation and routing." The homeowner nodded. "They buried it months ago. It leaked into my basement twice. They blamed me." The inspector scribbled notes aggressively. "I'm escalating this. City legal, environmental safety, and the whole works." For the first time in a long while, the homeowner felt someone was actually on their side. Just then, angry yelling erupted from next door. The HOA president, James Portman, stormed over, wet pajama bottoms, and an expression only pure humiliation could create. "You!" he growled, pointing a shaking finger. "You did this! You sabotaged the system!" The inspector stepped between them. "Sir, calm down. This system is illegal. Whoever installed—" Portman cut him off. "We did what was necessary. Home values were suffering because of poor drainage." "You destroyed my yard," the homeowner snapped back. "You polluted my basement. You lied to the neighborhood." Portman's fury shifted to desperation. "Do you know how expensive the correct installation is? We needed to get the system running before the seasonal rain. We didn't have time for permits." "So you used my property like a dumping ground? Without permission?" the homeowner fired back. He opened his mouth to respond, but instead his shoulders slumped, as if he realized there was no argument he could win here. The inspector cleared his throat. "Sir, I'll need documentation of any approvals you claim to have, and your contractors, and all HOA financial records related to this project." Portman paled. "Documentation? Unless you have something legitimate to share, this is serious fraud and environmental contamination." The homeowner didn't even try to hide the small smile forming. Portman's radio crackled, another board member begging him to come home urgently. Their houses were still flooding. Their personal disaster wasn't over yet. He scowled at the homeowner one last time. "We'll deal with this." Then he stormed away. The inspector turned back. "Don't worry, they're in real trouble." But the homeowner wasn't finished, not after everything they'd been put through. Later that afternoon, a neighborhood meeting erupted outside. Residents with trash bags covering their shoes yelled at Portman and the entire board. "You caused this! You stole our dues to cut corners! Our houses smell like sewage!" Portman tried to defend himself, claiming the homeowner purposely broke the pipes out of revenge. But the inspector shut that down, publicly. "This was installed illegally," he announced. "The property owner was victimized, The HOA is fully responsible. Gasps and angry shouts filled the air. Neighbors who once ignored the homeowner had now turned against the very people who claimed to protect the community. And in that chaotic moment, the homeowner realized something. They weren't alone anymore. Anger replaced embarrassment. Strength replaced fear. The truth finally had a witness, and soon there would be consequences. The homeowner looked at the muddy trenches in their yard, at the destroyed grass, the broken ground, and felt a fierce determination. This fight was far from over, but at least now the HOA was on the losing side. The days that followed were a whirlwind, not just for the homeowner, but for the whole neighborhood. The sewage leak became the talk of the town. City trucks arrived, inspectors took constant photos, and legal notices kept landing at the HOA members' doors like unwanted invitations. But the biggest spectacle was coming: the emergency HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, the same place where the board had once mocked the homeowner, dismissed their concerns, and pretended to be the guardians of the neighborhood's prestige. Walking in this time felt different. People nodded in support. Someone even placed a reassuring hand on the homeowner's shoulder, a silent apology for ever doubting them. Portman stood at the front with the rest of the board members, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His perfectly ironed polo was wrinkled, and dark circles dragged down his eyes. "This meeting," Portman began shakily, "is to discuss the unfortunate incident." "It's not an incident," a neighbor shouted. "You dumped sewage under their yard and ruined all of our homes." Portman's voice cracked, trying to regain control. We acted for the community. You acted for your wallets," another yelled. The room erupted. Residents who used to worship the HOA now wanted answers and restitution. That's when the city inspector and an environmental attorney approached the front. "Everyone quiet, please," the attorney commanded, placing a thick folder on the table. "We have completed our investigation." Silence swept over the room, the kind of silence heavy with dread. "The HOA leadership," he continued, "installed unauthorized drainage through private property using unlicensed contractors. They forged consent documents. They created an environmental hazard, and they knowingly ignored warnings." Several board members looked like they might faint. The inspector added, "Due to the contamination and rising health risk, the city will begin urgent excavation tomorrow. All costs, equipment, labor, disposal, will be billed directly to the HOA board members." Gasps rippled across the crowd. A woman burst into applause. Others followed. Portman's jaw trembled. This is outrageous. You can't expect us to pay for all that. We were helping." "No," the homeowner finally spoke up, their voice strong, steady. "You were bullying and lying and covering it up." Eyes turned to them as they walked closer to the front. "You guilt-tripped me. You humiliated me. You broke the law just to save yourselves a little time and money. And when things went wrong, you blamed me." The crowd murmured in agreement. "You didn't care about drainage," the homeowner continued. "You only cared about control." Neighbors who once ignored them now looked at them with respect, with gratitude. The attorney cleared his throat. Additionally, because the HOA board misused community funds without proper transparency, all board members are officially removed from their positions pending further legal action. One woman from the board immediately stepped back, removing her badge and dropping it into the trash. She quietly whispered, "I never wanted to be part of this," before hurrying out in shame. Portman, however, still couldn't accept defeat. "This neighborhood will fall apart without me," he shouted, spit flying. "We'll have weeds everywhere, ugly paint colors, trash cans out front. You need me." "No," the homeowner replied. "We need honesty. We need fairness, not fear." The applause this time was thunderous. Portman shrank. For the first time, he looked small. A neighbor stood up. "We vote for a new board, right now." Hands shot into the air. Relief spread through the room like sunshine after a storm, and something even better happened. A few neighbors approached the homeowner afterward, offering help to repair the yard. Some brought shovels, others brought food. The isolation the HOA had forced upon them finally cracked and disappeared. The very next morning, giant excavators rolled into the yard, digging up the illegal pipes. The city confirmed the contamination would be cleaned thoroughly, and the homeowner would not pay a single cent. Watching the pipes being hauled away felt like watching their anxiety being lifted, one metal piece at a time. Portman appeared from a distance, arguing with someone on the phone, probably realizing that his reign and his finances were collapsing fast. Justice wasn't just coming, it had arrived. A neighbor carrying a tray of lemonade smiled at the homeowner. "Looks like you won in the end." The homeowner took a cup and looked at their yard, messy, torn up, but finally being restored the right way. "No," they replied, "we all won." Because sometimes the people who want to bury you forget something important. You grow stronger when you rise again.